Welcome to Heath Riles BBQ. Today on Shooting the Q, we're going to be talking about brisket. Now this brisket comes from the Butcher Shoppe in Pensacola, Florida, from Kevin and Jordan Green. It is a phenomenal backyard brisket to cook. Of course, it's Wagyu, like I said. Super trim, come from Australia. I mean, brisket is always going to be an expensive cut of meat. But for 140 bucks, this brisket is not bad, considering you're going to pay about 60 to 70 at Costco or Sam's Club for a prime. So I went ahead and sprung for a Wagyu, and I'm not going to inject. I'm going to keep the seasonings very simple with our everyday rub, our beef rub, and our pecan rub. And I'm going to throw it on the Traeger grill and cook it. I'm sure it's going to turn out phenomenal. Let's get started. All right, now that I've got my brisket out of the pack and got all the blood dried off of it and everything, I want to go ahead. This is going to be the flat. This is going to be the point. Now what I like to start to do, I like to flip it over where the point's at. Now the good thing about these Australian briskets from the Butcher Shoppe, they already have the majority of the fat trimmed off the bottom. They're down to about 1/4 inch. It exposes some of the point already, and so it's perfectly fine. You're not paying for all that fat. Now I should have showed you on the other side, it's also got the decal trimmed out of it, which is a big hunk of fat. You're not paying for that. So that's a few pounds that you're not paying for, that you're having to pay for when you go buy a prime brisket or something. So springing for a Wagyu is really not as bad as you think. Now I want to go ahead and start. I always want to expose some bark on my point, because we all want to make burn ends, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start removing just some of the fat. Okay, and you got to be careful. You got to feel with your hands. Some of them thick pockets of fat is what you want to get off. Now some of this fat is not going to render, so that's what you want to trim off. And so until you take some of that off, you're really not going to be able to see what you're working with, if that makes sense. So just want to keep easily trim and just keep hacking away at it here. Boy, look at that marbling. Now, I'm going to go ahead, go around the edges here, remove a little bit of that fat. Now, keep getting some of the kind of tissue off of it. Now, once I kind of get it like that, and you're really not trimming down to 1/4 inch here because it's here, but I can feel right here, this may be a little more than 1/4 inch. So I'm going to come in here and trim some of that off, just so I can feel. And I believe we're down to about 1/4 inch right there. I always want to leave a little bit of fat on that flat here. And as you can see around here, you're down really got a nice thin line of fat. So you're fine with that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn this brisket back over. Now, what I was talking about, the decal already gone out of it, that big thick pocket of fat is already gone out of it, so you're not paying for it. Now, I'm going to come around here, and the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and come down my brisket, just to go ahead and kind of see what I'm working with. So when you do that, you can actually see what you're working with, okay? Now, I'm going to do the same thing on this side, on the point. I want to trim. Alright, round that off. Now, you see how the fat is right here? I want to see what I'm working with here. And boy, that point is marbled up. It really is. Now I'm going to come on down on the flat part. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut a little bit off there. And look at that marbling in that. Great, great, great. Now, I don't want to leave that totally square. I'm going to kind of round that around on the edge. Now, once I start doing that, it's really time to start trying to remove some of this. Now, you kind of have the option to remove it if you want to, if your knife skills are very good. I recommend it because some of this fat's not going to render. So you just want to come in here and be very gentle and just start removing some of this fat, okay? Now, as you can see, I'm just letting my knife do the work. This is a Cutco fillet knife that I'm using today. Now, Cutco makes some really good knives. I use Victorinox, I use Shun, I use Cutco. I have a couple custom knives, just kind of whatever's I've got sharpened up, ready to go. Now you always want to make sure your brisket's cold. I just took this one out of the fridge, and so it's still ice cold on my fingers. Now, You just keep going at it. And you see I'm not creating very many divots or pockets in it. And I'm trying to keep the knife cutting away from me as much as possible. I don't recommend cutting towards you because that knife could slip and get into it. Now there's always going to be a little bit kind of in the middle of the flat going up toward the point. There's always going to be a streak of fat like a lightning bolt that runs down right kind of in the center of it. You can kind of feel it. It's not very deep. You really don't want to divot it out very much because you're going to create a pocket in that brisket. Now this is the fat that separates the point from the flat right here. So you just want to get in here, trim some of it off. And I'm not going to trim a ton on this brisket, but it's probably going to be a little more aggressive than a lot of backyard guys are used to. And it's just me relating back to my comp trim, I guess is how I need to say it. Now I'm going to keep going in here. Now one thing that you can do, take your hand and put under and kind of flex it up here and trim, and then you're not making any pockets or anything like that. It's being real gentle and real easy with it. You got to remember, you're spending a lot of money. You don't want to mess your brisket up. Now we're just going to keep trimming away at this right here till we get it like we want it. Now I'm going to save some of this fat here, and that way I can grind it with some meat later on, some of my trimmings on some of my other stuff, some of my comp stuff, where I'm not wasting it. Now just want to keep going here. Now when you feel on this and you got a real thin edge here, you can actually cut some of that off, and I'm going to. Hey, my grill's saying add pellets here, which I will in a minute. I've already got the Traeger fired up, got it set at 275. Now I'm going to come in here, and you can see which way the grain is running on the flat here. Now I just trimmed a little bit more of that off, and I'm going to round that edge right there. Now a lot, that's not really bad right here. I'm going to come back and get just a little bit more of this off, but it's not necessary. It will render. Now I'm not going to trim any more of that'll render. If I was cooking a competition, I probably would come back and get just a tad bit more of that off, but right now I just want to focus and come up here and trim just a little more on this hard fat right here. Now you can see how I went in there and made a dip. Alright, and you just want to keep carving away at some of that hard fat. Now once you carve away at it, you're probably going to run into a gland like that right there. You're going to be sure that you cut that gland out. Now you can kind of see this is the flat that runs all the way up here. You can see where the point is down here. So I'm going to keep going in here. I'm going to kind of create a little bit of a V cut and go in here and remove some of that the best I can without getting into it much. Now what I'm going to do is, that's not going to be very much flat to eat. So I'm going to come in here, and since I'm going to save some of this for grind anyway, I'm going to come in here and trim some of that off. Now you can see how it separates right here. I could pull it apart, how the fat starts separating. Now I'm not going to get a lot into that. I'm just going to trim a little bit more of that fat off right here. Keep trimming away at that hard fat in there. Now I want to be sure that I get this hard fat off of this point here, because I do want to make burn ends. And a lot of people are going to ask me, do I turn burn ends in at a competition? I do not. So I save all my points and usually cook them 1 or 2 times a year, where I can get large pans of burn ends. Now I'm going to get just a little more of this fat off right here. And you can see that lightning bolt of fat, what I was kind of talking about, what I call it. Now I'm going to turn this open here. You see this thick pocket of fat here? I'm going to go in, you know what I was talking about a while ago about cutting a little bit of a V? I'm just going to go in. I'm going to let my knife do the work. And I'm just going to keep cutting. Now remember, keeping your brisket cold is one of the best things you can do right here. This fat starts getting hot on you, it's going to be harder to cut. A lot of people are intimidated by brisket. I think it's a cost standpoint. So don't be scared of it. Whoop. Now that you can kind of see that point lays a little bit better down here, I'm going to take my knife in here and I'm going to go and I'm going to kind of cut it kind of flat, right? I'm going to get in that pocket of fat. Now you can kind of see how it wants to come away from the flat here, okay? And I'll go ahead and I'll separate that, cut that little thick pocket of fat off right there. Now you can see how this hard fat right here is kind of really marbled up. I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to trim a little bit more of that out. Now you don't have to do that. Now, but when that brisket lays about like that, you got your point here, you got your flat here. I'm honestly ready to cook. That's all I'm going to do to this brisket right here. Now, a good tip is go ahead and clean that wet fat off your knife, because it's kind of hard to clean off if you don't. Going to wipe around here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn my brisket over. Remember, point, flat. Now, I'm going to take my glove off here. Go ahead and get a good coat of my salt, pepper, garlic, which is my everyday rub. Now, this can take some spices because it's such a big cut of meat. Go ahead and pat some of that in. Now, I'm going to go ahead and take some of my beef rub now. This is the same 3 rubs that I use in my competition when I'm cooking contests. And it's all about flavor. It's all about layering those layers of flavor, folks. Now, I tell you something that I don't do. I don't focus on getting the edge of the flat so much, because to me, when it stays on the grill for a long period of time, it kind of makes the edges crumble. So I don't focus on that as much. If a little bit of seasoning gets on it, that's fine. Now, once I get that beef rub kind of set, I'm going to go ahead and come back with a little bit of my pecan rub. Now, a lot of times in competition, I take my beef rub and only mix maybe a quarter of it of pecan with the beef rub to put on the brisket. But I'm just in my backyard, so I'm just going to layer a little bit on there. Now, not much, just a little bit for color and that savory note. Now, go ahead and get my brisket turned over. Now, remember, salt, pepper, garlic. I know some people's going to say that that's too much seasonings, he's putting too much on it. Well, everybody can do it their way. There's no right or wrong way. Now, once I go ahead and get this layered on pretty good, gonna keep patting it in. Now, you can actually spritz your brisket with a little bit of water, put a little bit of oil on it. Some people put mustard. There's all kind of different ways here. Now, on the point, I don't mind getting a little bit on the edges because I'm trying to make those burn ends. Now, once I get that layered on there like I want, I'm going to come back with a little bit of pecan rub. Now, I'm going to go ahead and let that set here for about 30 minutes to come on up to a little bit of ambient temperature before I put it on my Traeger. Now, once it's set here and sweat it in a little bit, we'll be back to put it on. Now, I'm cooking on the Traeger 1300 Timberline today. You probably heard some of the beeping going on. That means we need to add some pellets. I'm using pecan pellet today. I'm gonna go ahead and get my hopper topped off and fill it up. All right, my Traeger's up to temp. My pellets are full. Everything's ready to go. So I'm gonna go ahead. You see I've removed the top rack here. I'm gonna go ahead and put a pan in here, an empty pan. Now, the reason I'm doing that, I don't want to dirty up my grill no more than I have to. It makes any sense. I've got the capacity, so let's cook it on the top rack. Now, if your brisket had a sag in it, you can ball up a ball of aluminum foil and put on it. You want everything to kind of shield off your brisket. You don't want it to hold any moisture on top. Now that I've got it on and ready to go, get my pan positioned, I'm going to shut it on, shut the lid. I'm going to let it go to get about 170 degrees before I wrap it up. All right, let's get the grill lid shut. All right, our Wagyu brisket has been on the Traeger grill a little over 3 hours at 275 degrees. I want to go ahead and I made up a spritz. Now I used 1.5 cups of beef stock, 1/3 cup of Worcestershire, and 2 tablespoons of Killer Hogs Hot Sauce. I went ahead and mixed it up in a spray bottle, and let's see what this brisket looks like so we can get it sprayed. Now you can see how some of the moisture is starting to come out of the brisket. We're going to go ahead and we're going to keep it wet. I'm going to go ahead and just spray it real good. Now, I went ahead and I put a probe in my brisket on my Traeger. The probe's reading 144 degrees. I'm going to keep letting it go till it gets about 170 before we wrap. Alright, our brisket is hitting about 165 degrees. It's got the color I want. I'm not going to wait till it hits 170. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it now. Come on in, look at the color, and we'll get it over on the cutting board to wrap it. That is a phenomenal color on that brisket. It's been on a total of 7 hours so far. Bark is good and stuck. Starting to feel like Jello. Now we've got our brisket laid up on the foil. I've got my foil, I've got 2 layers of it here. I'm going to go ahead to start wrapping. You see it's got beautiful bark here. Now I'm going to put about 1 cup of the mixture I had of the beef stock, the Worcestershire sauce, a little bit of hot sauce in there. With Wagyu, you really don't have to wrap with anything if you don't want to. I'm going to put a little bit in there, not much, probably about 1 cup. So the first thing I'm going to do is come and I'm going to slide that brisket, alright, to where it's down. I'm going to pick it up onto the edge here, alright, roll that under. Now, I'm going to come over, now, come back. Now, I'm going to take and roll that up, right? Now, I'm going to come on this side and make like a little boat here, right? Not to make a mess here. I'm going to go ahead and pour about 1 cup in there of liquid with it. Now, I'm going to take and wrap it up as well. So I'm going to form it all around the edges here, make sure everything's good. Now I'm going to stick my alarm right back in here. I'm going to set the alarm for 2:02 and start checking it and see if it feels like butter. I'm going to bump the grill to 325. So I started off, remember, 275 for 7 hours, and I'm going to 325 till she feels like butter. All right, here we go. All right, our brisket has hit 207 degrees. We checked it at 203. It just didn't have that feel. I'm going to check it now. So I'm going to go in here. It's hitting that 206, 207 mark, 208. That's where it needs to be. I went ahead and put the grill in shutdown mode. I'm just going to shut the lid and leave it alone and let it go for just rest for about 30 minutes. And then I'm going to be ready to start slicing. I've got my brisket out here. You can see it's still steaming a little bit, but the color and everything looks phenomenal on it. Now I'm going to go ahead and you can see the point from the flat here. I'm going to turn it around. Oh man, that feels good. That Jello. I'm going to go ahead and take my knife. Now I'm just going to gently run. I'm going to raise this up and run this knife down till I cut that point off. Now I'm going to slide that point off. Now make burn ends here. I'm going to go ahead and slice this, well, let me turn it this way, in a little bitty morsels and cubes is what we're looking for. Yeah, turn that around. You got to be careful with them. and just keep cutting them. The little cubes. Now you can take these, toss them in a little sauce, put them back on the grill, whatever you want. I'm not going to put any sauce on them myself. I'm just going to eat them like they are. Oh yeah. I'll finish cutting that up in a minute. Oh, those are so good. Oh, so good. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to slice this brisket in the middle to start with. Or, no, I'll tell you what, I'm going to start on the end. I always go about an inch or so in on the end. And just start cutting. That's all you want to do. Now, that brisket was kind of thin on the ends, so it's going to crumble a little bit. I could have done it like a competition brisket and trimmed more off of it, but it really don't matter. And I'm just going to keep cutting that brisket. You want to hold your hand on it. Keep cutting. Man, that's good. One thing you want to do here is, you still got some of the point on here. I'm going to go ahead and take some of that off where I get down to just the flat. And take some of that fat off. Ooh. Now, I'm going to turn that back over. Alright, and keep going in it here. And when you do that, you kind of just make better slices, honestly, to going in from the point. Now we're going to get this thing sliced up. We'll be right back. Alright, now that we've got all the brisket sliced, I'm going to go in here, pick me out a piece. Oh yeah. Lay it over that knife there. We got a little bit of a clapper, as Malcolm would say. Ain't nothing like having a clapper. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put down my knife. The moisture in this Wagyu brisket from the Butcher Shoppe down in Pensacola is incredible. But you can take that brisket and it'll just break right apart. No problem. No pull whatsoever. Remember, I took this to 207, 208 degrees before I let it rest. It would be better if you let this brisket rest for about an hour to hour and a half, but like I said, we were having a dinner. 30 minutes is all I could wait. Now I want to get in here and try a piece of this flat right here. Flavor's incredible. For my brisket cooking bundle, this is the same 3 rubs that we use in competition. The only thing we do different, we make up a au jus, a dip, a little bit different. We also inject our brisket. That's it. Now remember, we cooked this brisket at 275 for 7 hours. Formed a good bark, got up to about 165 degrees. We wrapped it for about an hour and a half. Let it go to 207, 208. We let it rest for about 30 minutes, and then we sliced it. This is just a great, simple backyard brisket. I really hope that you like what we're doing here on our channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, share it with your friends. We'll be putting out more videos weekly. Thanks.